PLT, caution warning, memory cleared, no unexpected errors. OTC copy.
The gaseous oxygen vent hood is being retracted away from the top of the external tank at this time.
Discovery, OTC, close and lock your visors and initiate O2 flow. Copy on work.
T-minus 2 minutes and counting.
PLS, let's go for ET, LH2 pressurization.
T-minus 90 seconds and counting. All systems are go. We're about 90 seconds from the launch of Space Shuttle Discovery. T-minus 60 seconds and counting. We are transferring to orbiter internal power at this time. Discovery is now running off its 3 onboard fuel cells. Coming up on a go for auto sequence start.
PLS, go for auto sequence start.
And we have a go for auto sequence start. Discovery's onboard computers have primary control of all the vehicle's critical functions. T-minus 17 seconds and counting. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Go for main engine start. Main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
Houston now controlling the flight of Discovery. The Space Shuttle begins the journey back into orbit. Discovery completes its roll. The shuttle now heads down, wings level for the 8.5-minute ride to orbit. This view from a camera on the external tank's liquid oxygen feed line showing the bird's eye view of Discovery as it races towards space, a star-spangled start to Discovery's mission. Discovery's 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttle back to 67% of rated performance, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. Discovery already 3.5 miles in altitude, 1.5 miles downrange, traveling almost 750 miles an hour. Everything looking good on the bird. 57 seconds into the flight, engines beginning to rev up. Standing by for the throttle up call from Capcom Steve Frick.
Discovery Houston, go at throttle up.
Roger, go at throttle up, sounds USF only.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Steve Lindsay.
Discovery Houston, it's expected data hits, it'll clear shortly.
Copy.
Lindsay joined on the flight deck by pilot Mark Kelly, flight engineer Lisa Nowak, and mission specialist Mike Fossum. Mission specialists Piers Sellers, Stephanie Wilson, and Thomas Ryder of the European Space Agency down on the middeck. Ryder headed for 6 months on the International Space Station. 1 minute, 47 seconds into the flight, 22 miles in altitude, 18 miles downrange, traveling 2,600 miles an hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster separation. Solid rocket booster separation confirmed. Guidance now converging. Discovery's onboard computers commanding the main engine nozzles to swivel, aiming the shuttle for its precise target in space for main engine cutoff.
We should have a good forward leg now on S-band.
And you sound good.
2 minutes, 35 seconds into the flight, 39 miles in altitude for Discovery, 49 miles downrange, traveling 3,200 miles an hour. Discovery now flying on the singular power of its 3 liquid fuel main engines, those power plants draining a half a ton of fuel per second from the shuttle's fuel tank.
Copy, 2 engine Maroon.
That call from Capcom Steve Frick indicating should we lose a main engine, we can make our transoceanic abort target at Morón, Spain. But all 3 main engines are humming along with the auxiliary power units and the 3 power-producing fuel cells. Booster officer here in Mission Control confirms 3 good main engines. Discovery straight as an arrow, speeding toward a date with the International Space Station on Thursday. 3.5 minutes into the flight. Discovery now 53 miles in altitude, 100 miles downrange, speeding along at a clip of more than 4,000 miles an hour. Discovery nearing the point of negative return, where the shuttle would be too far downrange, too high in altitude to return to the launch site in the event of an engine failure.
Discovery Houston, negative return.
Copy, negative return.
4 minutes, 8 seconds into the flight. Discovery 61 miles in altitude, 150 miles downrange, 5,000 miles an hour is its speed. The environmental systems officer reports a good flash evaporator system activated, providing cooling for Discovery's avionics until the time that we open the payload bay doors an hour and a half into the flight. More than halfway to orbit now at the 4-minute 39-second point into the flight. Discovery 65 miles in altitude, 200 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center.
Discovery Houston, no action on the left dome's tank P. It was due to the left dome's accumulator, but it's back up to a good pressure.
Yeah, we see that, Houston. Roger, no action.
That call, an instrumentation issue, no impact. Discovery in good shape, 5 minutes, 15 seconds into the flight, 255 miles downrange, traveling almost 7,000 miles an hour. Discovery soon will be rolling to a heads-up position through the swiveling of its main engines, enabling the shuttle to gain more favorable communications through the tracking and data relay satellite as it heads uphill.
Press the ATO, select Istris.
Roger, press ATO, selecting Istris.
Discovery Houston, single engine, Ops 3.
Single engine Ops 3.
Those calls indicating that we can make our minimal orbital cutoff targets in the event of a dual engine failure. Rolled a heads up in the plane view of this camera on the liquid oxygen feed line. Everything looking good for Discovery. 6 minutes, 11 seconds into the flight.
Discovery Houston, single engine Istris 104.
Roger, single engine Istris 104.
That call indicating that we can make our transoceanic abort targets in the event of a dual engine failure. However, all 3 engines on Discovery continue to function normally, along with the auxiliary power units and the fuel cells. 6 minutes, 40 seconds into the flight, 2 minutes of powered flight remaining for Discovery.
Discovery Houston, press to MECO. We show a nominal shutdown plan. Your go for the plus X and go for the pitch maneuver.
Copy, press to MECO, go for the plus X, go for the pitch maneuver, and nominal MECO.
Those calls acknowledged by Steve Lindsay, Discovery's commander, indicating with Discovery now 516 miles downrange that we can make our main engine cutoff targets, all 3 engines in good shape, and that Lindsay will be given the green light to pitch up Discovery to allow umbilical well photography of the external tank after it is discarded. 7.5 minutes into the flight, Discovery's main engines soon will be throttled down to limit the stress on the shuttle and its 7 crew members to that of 3 times the effective gravity. Discovery currently traveling at a speed of more than 4 miles a second.
This is Greg Dobbs. Just so you know what you're seeing, that is the belly of the shuttle in the upper right part
Discovery
of the screen.
traveling 14,000 miles an hour, 675 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, about 40 seconds of powered flight remaining.
The camera is installed on the external fuel tank. That's what you see coming out of the bottom of your screen. And when they separate, in about 30 seconds now, those brackets will separate from the belly of the space shuttle, and it will appear that the space shuttle is rising away. The fact of the matter is the external fuel tank will be dropping toward a disintegrating
8 minutes,
trajectory.
15 seconds into the flight. Everything looking good on Discovery, standing by for main engine cutoff. That will be followed a few seconds later by the separation of the external fuel tank. The booster officer reports that we have main engine cutoff, standing by for external tank separation. External tank separation confirmed. Commander Steve Lindsay now maneuvering Discovery to the correct orientation so that video and digital stills of the external tank can be captured by cameras embedded in the shuttle's umbilical well. A smooth ride to orbit for the shuttle Discovery, embarking on what is expected to be a 13-day mission.
One of the remarkable
In a couple of minutes, astronauts Mike Fossum and Stephanie Wilson will begin several minutes of video documentation.
Discovery Houston, we showed a nominal MECO. OMS 1 is not required.
Copy and control, Houston.
Fossum and Stephanie Wilson will begin several minutes of video documentation and photography of the external tank that has been now discarded. Discovery will be about 1,450 feet away from the tank at that time. Fossum will record video using a PD-100 camcorder. Wilson will use a digital camera with a 400mm lens. All of that will be downlinked about 3.5 hours into the flight for analysis by imagery experts, along with the imagery from Discovery's umbilical well cameras. As it turned out, patience was a virtue. The third time was the charm. Discovery now in its preliminary orbit.
Well, 11 months ago, the manager of the shuttle program, Wayne Hale, said that when finally Discovery got off the ground and they had about 2 weeks worth of delays, he said his heart was in his throat. I think it's hard for any of us who have just seen that, especially in high definition, to feel any other way. Absolutely remarkable. And those last shots you saw from the camera installed on the external fuel tank, those shots, you have to remember, were live television in the making. They were not still photos, and yet it is it is entirely imperceptible, the movement. At that point of separation, Space Shuttle Discovery, you saw her rise out of the picture. Actually, she was on the same trajectory. She was traveling 17,000 miles per hour, but in the zero-gravity, super-cold environment of space, it was almost imperceptible. I want to watch it again. I hope you want to watch it again. HDNet had cameras in a number of positions around the Kennedy Space Center. So let's once again, instead of this shot of the empty Launch Pad 39B, watch Discovery rise to the heavens once again.
Off of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
The Discovery roll program.
Houston now controlling the flight of Discovery. The space shuttle begins the journey back into orbit. Discovery completes its roll. The shuttle now heads down, wings level.
We are transferring to orbiter internal power at this time. Discovery is now running off its 3 onboard fuel cells. Coming up on a go for auto sequence start.
Let's go for auto sequence start.
And we have a go for auto sequence start. Discovery's onboard computers have primary control of all the vehicle's critical functions. T-minus 17 seconds and counting. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Go for main engine start. Main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
The Discovery roll program.
Houston now controlling the flight of Discovery, the space shuttle.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Go for main engine start. Main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
The Discovery roll program.
Houston now controlling the flight of Discovery, the space shuttle begins the journey back into orbit. Discovery completes its roll. The shuttle now heads down, wings level for the 8.5-minute ride to orbit. This view from a camera on the external tank's liquid oxygen feed line, showing the bird's eye view of Discovery as it races towards space, a star-spangled start to Discovery's mission. Discovery's 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttled back to 67% of rated performance, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. Discovery already 3.5 miles in altitude, 1.5 miles downrange, traveling almost 750 miles an hour. Everything looking good on the bird. 57 seconds into the flight, engines beginning to rev up. Standing by for the throttle up call from Capcom Steve Frick.
Discovery Houston, go at throttle up.
Roger, go at throttle up. Show USF only.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Steve Lindsay.
Discovery Houston, it's expected data hits. It'll clear shortly.
Copy.
Lindsay joined on the flight deck by pilot Mark Kelly, flight engineer Lisa Nowak, and mission specialist Mike Fossum. Mission specialists Piers Sellers, Stephanie Wilson, and Thomas Ryder of the European Space Agency down on the middeck. Ryder headed for 6 months on the International Space Station.
Well, that was a peerless demonstration of man's ingenuity and a brilliant display yet again of the blinding, almost bone-rattling beauty of Space Shuttle Discovery. So far, so good. It used to be that about 2.25 minutes into flight, when there was a separation, 2.25 minutes in flight, when they've escaped the worst heat and friction of the atmosphere, that there was a sigh of relief. But then came Columbia in 2003 at 81.7 seconds into flight. I've been told that at that early milestone, they are breathing a bit of relief right away. And there are other milestones when they determined, as you heard in radio communication, that they could reach their backup abort landing sites in Europe on 2 engines, then on only 1 engine. And of course, they passed all those milestones without flaw. And finally, though, when I asked Wayne Hale, the director of the shuttle program, the manager, I said, when do you breathe a sigh of relief? He said, I've learned one thing. I don't breathe a sigh of relief until the shuttle touches down and the wheels stop turning. Now, that is due to come on July 16th, unless they extend by a day and add a 13th day to the mission, in which case they would land on July 17th. But the beauty of what we just saw, the beauty of what we just experienced, is that the space shuttle took off on the 4th of July in the rocket's red glare. On the behalf of everybody who made this possible at HDNet, and on the behalf of everybody at NASA, with prayers for the 7 Discovery astronauts on the 4th of July, I'm Greg Dobbs. Hope and pray that they land when and where they intend. Good afternoon.
The Discovery roll program.
Houston now controlling the flight of Discovery. The space shuttle begins the journey back into orbit. Discovery completes its roll. heads down, wings level for the 8.5-minute ride to orbit. This view from a camera on the external tank's liquid oxygen feed line showing the bird's eye view of Discovery as it races towards space, a star-spangled start to Discovery's mission. Discovery's 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttled back to 67.